Welcome to The Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. On this special episode, I am thrilled to be sharing an excerpt from the recent Season 3 opener of my Remarkable Retail podcast, where my podcast partner Steve Dennis and I interview Brad Stone. Brad is the Senior Executive Editor of Global Technology at Bloomberg News and author of Amazon Unbound, Jeff Bezos and the Invention of a Global Empire. Let's listen in now, starting with an introduction by Steve.
Well, we're delighted to kick off Season 3 of the Remarkable Retail podcast with our special guest, Brad Stone, who is a writer, author extraordinaire. But before we jump into his brand new book, Amazon Unbound, Brad, would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and your professional journey?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Hi, Michael. I currently run the technology coverage at Bloomberg News. I've been a tech journalist. Oh, boy, I'm going to date myself here, but it's more than 20 years. Was at Newsweek magazine, then the New York Times, and then came over to Bloomberg to write for Business Week. And Amazon was one of the first companies I covered, first as a junior reporter for Newsweek. And, you know, was always sort of interested in the company, how secretive it was, how it was disrupting retail, and just followed it, covered it as a beat reporter for the New York Times. And then at some point, it kind of occurred to me that no one had written the great Amazon story. And that was what at least led me to my first book, The Everything Store, in 2013.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about your new book, but The Everything Store, to me, is just one of those really fascinating books. So that came out in 2013. Do I have that?
That's right. Yep.
So Amazon wasn't, I don't think, I mean, my memory gets hazy as I get older, but Amazon wasn't quite the source of fascination that it has become today. Is that, you know, I guess it was sort of interesting timing. Maybe that was a little bit risky to write a book back then, or not so much?
I think it was an object of obsession in the book business. And so in a weird way, the book business was the canary in the coal mine. Amazon was disrupting publishing, not just with the Kindle, but with its own company-owned imprints. And it's funny to look back at it because now it seems like such small stakes when you look at Amazon buying MGM or investing in Prime Video, growing internationally. I joke that the book industry is like the child of a previous marriage for Amazon. It's like they love the kid, they want to see it do well, but they're really more focused on the new children right now. Maybe they've got a little bit more potential. But so back then, you know, I was selling a book about Amazon to book publishers that were obsessed, you know, that were thinking about it day and night and worried about it. And yeah, I think the larger world, they maybe appreciated Amazon and Jeff Bezos a little bit more. There was a little bit maybe more of a heroic story, you know, the story of an entrepreneur changing the world to people who followed it. Now, you know, not only is Amazon more relevant, you know, and more higher profile, but I actually think there's a little bit more of a negative shadow looming over the company and over Jeff Bezos as he retires now as CEO.
Yeah, and definitely want to get into that. But I have two quick questions. I don't know if the answers are quick about the Everything Store. One is, so I worked at Sears way back when in my career, which at one point was kind of the Everything Store. And people have asked me whether I thought Sears could have become the Everything Store, you know, could have been Amazon. First question is, any just general thoughts about kind of the Sears, Amazon, Walmart narrative, big picture?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I remember reading Don Katz's book about Sears when I was working on the Everything Store, and of course, the great irony is that he now is the CEO of Audible, and so is an Amazon executive, and was basically the Sears historian. But no, I mean, it's like we've seen the rise and fall of these retail juggernauts over centuries. And for this book, I read a book called The Great A&P by Mark Levinson about the rise of the first scale retailer, the grocery chain. And it just feels like the stories of these companies follow a sort of rhythm. And they rise, and then the founders leave, and the entrepreneurial energy saps away, and they're handed over to, you know, a new generation of executives. But Wall Street starts to expect more predictable financial performance, and then gradually they fall. And it'll be the big challenge for Amazon as to whether they can really defy that trend. I think to a certain extent Walmart has. While its growth isn't no longer spectacular, it certainly is as relevant as ever. So, but yeah, I don't know that Sears could have remained nimble enough or pivoted enough, particularly as the private equity folks kind of came in to avoid the fate that has befallen it.
Someday, maybe we'll turn that into a whole other podcast series or something. But maybe transitioning to the new book. So my second question around the Everything Store, as the title was, I do definitely feel like way back when in 2013, Amazon was largely viewed as a retailer. Obviously, as time has gone on, Amazon, not that there wasn't some of that going on back with your first book, but now Amazon is such a much more diverse company. So I don't know how you want to answer the question, but I'm sort of curious, is it really fair even to think about Amazon as a retailer anymore? And just maybe start to talk about what motivated you to write this second book about Amazon. But really, I would say in some respects, it's much more of a book about Jeff Bezos as a personality than it is Amazon per se.
Yeah, it's interesting. The original title that I had for the book, and this is still the name of the folder on my hard drive where I keep all my files, was The Everything Company. And the idea was that it really wasn't a store anymore. It was so multidimensional. But look, I tend to think that Amazon sort of defies easy description now, and it is a retailer. Look, I mean, it's one of the world's, it's now, I guess, maybe the world's second largest retailer. It also happens to be so many other things: a device maker, a cloud computing provider, an entertainment company. And all of these have some very opaque but interesting connections between themselves. Like the retail part of Amazon is the largest customer for AWS. And one of the ways in which Amazon makes money on Alexa devices is through people making purchases with their voice. But it is a retailer, right? And the biggest part of the company is devoted to taking those orders and then fulfilling them and dropping them off people's doorsteps. So it just requires, I think, and I have the hardest time getting my head around this. Amazon can't be described anymore in an easy one or two sentences. It's just I was thinking about this as I was writing the book, trying to outline it, which you can just imagine the headache because everything's happening at the same time, and you generally want to write these things chronologically. But there's just so much surface area to the company, all the different departments and divisions that I was just talking about, and then Bezos' transformation, which kind of runs through it. He starts as this single-minded tech geek with the crazy hyena laugh, and he ends up the object of tabloid fascination, the wealthiest guy in the world, and a figure who is somewhat divisive. And so, just surface area. So I was actually Googling the name, and of course I don't recall it now off the top of my head, but for the name for a geometric shape with an infinite number of sides, because I thought that actually kind of describes Amazon right now.
Well, picking up on that theme, I mean, certainly if you think about growth, I think of vertically. In other words, we just do more of what we used to do, and horizontally we do other things. Both characterize Amazon. What in your mind has been some of the biggest changes? Is it around the way the company is run? I mean, here's a startling factoid. An ex-boss of mine became a president. Joe Galli is one of the first external. He came from Black & Decker. I worked for him at Black & Decker, and he became one of the first external presidents. Is it the culture that's changed, or is it Bezos that's changed, or what in addition to this scope and scale in your mind is the biggest difference?
Yeah, the story of Joe Galli, by the way, is a fascinating one. He remains the only COO in Amazon's history, and he was there for about a year. I tell the story in the Everything Store, and it was at a time when Bezos was thinking about stepping away and maybe taking that executive chairman role that he now is finally taking. I don't know that the culture has it changed that much? I think it's grown exponentially larger. But one of the remarkable accomplishments is that Bezos he's not just an inventor, he has created a system of invention. And it's everything from the 6-page documents that start off every meeting, to the 14 leadership principles, to the biannual company reviews, OP1 and OP2. And he created a system that's very easy to scale. And so you have now, an infinite number of divisions operating in a very decentralized way, getting their goals from the leadership team, the S team, and reporting their progress several times a year with these data-rich, metrics-heavy progress reports. So, maybe the culture. Look, Bezos micromanaged everything early on. He is a maniac, so it was probably harder early on when he had his eye on everything. Now he can't possibly do that, so he's micromanaging the new stuff. It was Alexa in the early days of that project, and he's allowing deputies to run everything else. So yeah, I don't think we can say that the Amazon culture has gotten laid back. It certainly hasn't. But because the founder, the executive who everyone's scared of has receded somewhat, maybe it's become a little bit more corporate and certainly bureaucratic.
I mean, unpack for me. I want to pick up on one thread. You talked about allowing deputies to run divisions. I have a hard time in my mind imagining a leader like Jeff Bezos being hands off on a lot of decisions. But is that part of the art and science that he's been able to master? Is been able to step back yet still keep a firm hand on the rudder? Because as Steve said, and you echoed, these inflection points, these transition points are so tricky. I mean, we can say as many companies, I think a GE under Jack Welch, right, built a behemoth with momentum, and it was almost a religion of management, and it just didn't do so well after he left. But I guess that's this inflection point. Is what do you hope that the retailers take away from how he has stepped back yet keeps the direction going? Is it just culture that is that?
Well, he does something where I kind of think of it as managing from different altitudes. And on the new projects, Alexa, the Go store with the cashierless technology, probably new stuff like the healthcare initiatives and the satellite initiative called Project Kuiper. He's very close to the ground. He's meeting with teams maybe as often as every week. And we should caveat that all this will change in late July when he steps away as CEO. But he's been meeting with teams regularly, reviewing documents. In the book, I talk about the early days of Alexa when he was meeting with that team multiple times a week. And then with the more mature parts of the company, the marketplace, the retail division overall, AWS, he has allowed deputies to run those divisions pretty autonomously. He'll review their 6-page documents once or twice a year. But then what he'll do is he'll audit those businesses. If he gets an email from a customer, he sees a problem, maybe he encounters one himself, he suddenly he dives down towards the ground, and suddenly he's in there.
It's one of those ominous emails with the question mark
exactly
that you described in the Everything story.
I'm sure
I'm sure everyone just jumps off their chair like it's been electrified when they get
strikes
one of those.
Fear in the hearts of employees. And in Amazon Unbound, I tell a couple of stories. In 2017, for example, when in an OP1 meeting he discovers that the retail division has been relying on advertising for their profitability, and suddenly they're meeting with him every week. So it's managing from different altitudes, allowing key deputies to be autonomous, to run their divisions with independence, but then to come in and convey his philosophy or steered in a different direction if it's necessary.
One of the things I really enjoy about the book, there's so many things I enjoy about it, but it's the way you've organized the 3 parts, which I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about in a second, but just to try to help readers or listeners picture this. So part 1 is about invention, but in the beginning of that chapter, you call out what the annual sales, number of employees, market cap, and Jeff Bezos's net worth. And then you transition to the second part, which is leverage, and same thing, you update that. And then part 3 is called invincibility. But Brad, could you just talk a little bit about why you chose to organize things that way and how that helps you put together all the amazing history and anecdotes and leadership lessons that you've got in the book.
Yeah, sure. No, I'd be delighted to talk about it because, as I said, like organizing this book was the most difficult challenge. Much harder than the Everything Store, which was a very linear story, right? A group of guys in a garage with an idea to the company being globally recognized and somewhat feared in quarters. But this book is the big company getting much bigger, and it's a bunch of things happening at the same time. I wanted to preserve the chronology, but also organize it somewhat via topics. So the first section is invention, and I'm telling the stories of not just Alexa and the Amazon Ghost stores, but Amazon's incursion into India, the creation of Prime Video and Amazon Studios, Bezos buying the Washington Post, and then wrangling with some cultural issues in the early part of the decade around that like famous New York Times story about its culture. And then the key pivotal years of AWS and releasing financials on its underlying profitability. And then the second part of the book is called Leverage, and that's basically the older parts of the business, right? Marketplace, consumables, the operations division, the advertising division, and how those older parts of the business suddenly became much more profitable, in part because of some of the changes in direction that Bezos conveyed. For example, making the marketplace a global platform for sellers to sell across borders. And of course, all those changes came with some unintended consequences. And then I include Blue Origin in there. And so part of it is it's somewhat subjective, right? I needed to find homes for these things, but chronologically it kind of worked also. And then the last section of the book is invincibility. And you guys will appreciate, I thought pretty hard about what do I call this third part of the book. And that includes HQ2 and Bezos' tangle with the National Enquirer and some of the antitrust proceedings and then the pandemic. And at the end of it, I thought, you know what? Like Amazon skated through all of these controversies and in some cases disasters and was unscathed, right? It's a $1.8 trillion company right now, almost. And I thought, you know what? If anything, they've demonstrated that they're pretty close to invincible. And that's how I came up with the last part of it.
One thing that's pretty incredible when I was going through getting prepped for the interview and I was looking at some of the numbers. So as you obviously know, but just for the listeners, part two, at the beginning of Leverage, Amazon's net sales are 136 billion. And the market cap's 355 billion. And then just 2 years later, those numbers have basically doubled. So doubling of market cap and sales in just a couple of years. And I guess now the market cap's 1.7 trillion or I don't know.
Yep. And I just looked, Bezos is now worth $201 billion.
Yeah. And McKinsey got a little bit of that, as I recall.
Exactly. So, post-divorce.
So here's an unfair question. If you had to, and I hate to put you on the spot, but if we really fumble with this, I guess we can just edit it out. But if you had to come up with a chapter title or a part title for part 4 at this point, 3 years later, any thoughts on what that might be?
Yeah.
I mean, once you get to invincibility, it's hard to.
I would say, first of all, I might do something like that for the paperback edition. But I think it's very much, I would position it as an epilogue. And in some ways, I think that's what this period feels like, at least to this story. Well, as I was finishing this book, Bezos announced via the I think it was the fourth quarter earnings report that he would be leaving the CEO role. And I had a moment of panic because I thought, this might change my whole book. But then I kind of realized, you know what? This is in some ways the story I've been telling of Bezos, his eyes opening up to a larger world, becoming a political figure, an entertainment figure, a tabloid figure, and starting to enjoy the life of leisure to which his wealth had, introduced him. And he's building the mega yacht, which I report in the book. And so I thought, you know what, I don't need to do much. And I obviously worked it into the last chapter. But I think what this period feels like is Bezos stepping further back, setting a time to leave the CEO role, And then July 26th, going to space, right? This is like the thing that he's always dreamed of. I have a quote in the Everything Store from an ex-girlfriend saying the reason Bezos is making all this money is to go to space one day. So either epilogue or maybe adventure.
I'm just trying to lose a few pounds.
No, yeah.
That's my goal.
Maybe he can recommend a personal trainer for you.
Apparently.
Yeah.
Apparently.
But maybe it's also adventure, because he really does seem like he's so criticized for his wealth right now, but he just doesn't seem to care. And he's going to go and have these adventures and experiences and maybe move on a little bit from caring how that shadow falls onto Amazon as a result.
So, we're at a point of transition, and I just want to come back to this whole culture of transition piece, because it feels, and there's been some recent news about things like turnover at Amazon, but the sense that it's ingrained in a culture that there's productivity and this battle, so to speak, between machines and humans and productivity, and a certain amount of turnover is okay. I mean, they've got a fairly high turnover level. They're hiring hundreds of thousands of people, which tells me they're hiring more people than they're opening warehouses. So they've got some turnover, but maybe as the culture as it exists today is built for that. As you move forward, as you say, into this next part, which is, maybe it's this intersection or transition or inflection point, what's your bet, given everything you know about this organization, that they can keep this culture going? As you said, there's many examples of folks who did it. You think of Walmart today, you walk in a buyer's office, there's Sam Walton quotes, and they still have vendors who call them collect, right? I mean, these pieces of culture just, sustained for decades, long past the founder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Amazon's in a pretty good position to continue its success. It feels to a certain extent like a boulder rolling downhill right now, just gathering speed. And the fact that there are now fulfillment centers within 60 miles of my house and who knows, maybe your houses, the fact that Amazon has this vast transportation fleet, it just means that they've got so many advantages now. And I really don't see anyone capable of catching up anytime soon. The turnover is a problem. It's very much by design. As I write in the book, Bezos always wanted a little bit of a temporary workforce. He didn't want employees to get entrenched, to maybe be prone to unionization. He thought that would limit the company's flexibility. As Amazon gets bigger, the hiring needs get ever more extraordinary, but the company has so many little knobs at its disposal, right? If it's suddenly finding itself in a low employment environment, having difficulty hiring for the holidays, we saw it during the pandemic. They offered a $17 an hour starting wage and a signing bonus. Those are things that its competitors, including Walmart, really can't do, right? For a number of reasons, some of them just can't afford it, but others have to conform to market expectations, and it would really hurt their profit. And Amazon's profit is soaring right now, and investors are always willing to tolerate a bad quarter or two. So there are just so many advantages Amazon has at its disposal right now.
I mean, that's almost a whole subject for a whole other podcast, is this part about exceptions, right? As you say, companies as big as Walmart can and could, certainly have the financial resources to make the same investments, but they seem to be measured by a different metric fairly consistently. How is it, do you think, that Bezos and Amazon have been able to keep that narrative and keep that going so long that they're just seen as different, as a different form of capitalism?
Right. And I guess we should question, is that really true anymore? I mean, Amazon is so now extraordinarily profitable that maybe finally investors are going to begin to expect it. And if they were to lose money for a couple quarters, we might see a reversal in the direction of the stock price. But I think you go back to 1997 in that first shareholder letter where Bezos stated how he was going to run the company, and then did so. And Amazon kind of wandered in the desert for 10 years with a very stagnant stock price after the dot-com bust. But they've been right about so many things, not just e-commerce, but the Kindle and Alexa and Amazon Web Services, that they've earned the trust. Now,
and they've created. I mean, let's not sell Amazon short by any means. They've created some of the most innovative technology and business models in the past century. I would think.
Totally. Now, the question is, Bezos obviously got a lot of he had a lot of loyalty, and he convinced investors to have a lot of patience. And a key question is whether that kind of halo or how much of it will transfer over to Andy Jassy and the new leadership team. If he has a couple of bad quarters, will the institutional investors hold their noses and keep the faith in the same way that they did for the years of Jeff Bezos? That's a key question.
So, Brad, I'm mindful of our time, and we talked off mic about when we were trying to get organized for this interview. There's just so much in this book. There's, you can tell. You're a great writer, but you're a great reporter as well. There's just so many anecdotes and stories and chronologies and so forth. But I'm curious. So, in the Everything Store, you track down Bezos's father. In Amazon Unbound, you track down the voice of Alexa, which is a fun little anecdote. But I'm curious, among all the stories, whether they're about Bezos or just things that happened at Amazon, are there one or two that you just really, really love and maybe give a flavor for what readers will find when they dive into Amazon Unbound?
Yeah, and the Alexa voice was funny. Because I thought when I started on this book, how can I possibly duplicate the feat with the father? Presumably Jeff didn't have any other long lost relatives to find. So I thought, you know what, I'm gonna figure out who Alexa is, and that's in the book. But I'll give you two that really maybe jumped out at me, probably because they were so difficult. Well, one was it's sort of curious, but it's the case of the single cow burger. And I heard this kind of mythology inside the company that Bezos had become obsessed with having Amazon Fresh manufacture and sell a hamburger made from the meat of just one cow, and he was taste testing it and asking for changes in the formula and the packaging. He had read a story about how hamburgers were made in the Washington Post, and he thought this was something that Amazon could do that was unique. And we talked about that style of leadership changing altitudes, and here's one where it was very close to the ground. And the story of the single cow burger is in the book, and I think it's pretty funny. And in the end, it doesn't make much of a difference to Amazon Fresh, but it's an example of how Bezos is really consumed with just doing new things. And then, look, the story that I tell in Chapter 13 about Bezos's entanglement with the National Enquirer and his Medium post about how they were extorting him and the involvement of the Saudis. You guys, you probably can appreciate how difficult it was to unspool that Byzantine story. Everyone involved in that, it was a questionable character with strong motives.
Girlfriend's brother. Oh my God! It's like made for the old what's that old soap opera, Peyton Place?
Exactly.
It's just
we'll bring it back. And. Oh boy. And then Bezos himself, like blaming political intrigue and international espionage and MBS and the Saudis, when really none of that was, at least I don't think was true. I think it was really the brother turning over his private information to but in addition to it being a great story, I think this book is about transformation, the transformation of the company and the transformation of its founder. And this was it's a key waypoint in Bezos's metamorphosis from the tech geek consumed with Amazon into someone who is comfortable appearing, being photographed at the courtside at Wimbledon and buying his own yacht and taking helicopter lessons and now going to space. And so it really does. I think the way he handled that and kind of escaped scrutiny is a great example of how he operates and how much he's changed.
Well, you've somehow managed, and I'm very envious, you somehow managed to do what a lot of great business books do in terms of, laying out lessons and providing history and context and behind the scenes, as well as this, what I think is very much, kind of the classic hero's journey. So it's got a sort of a novelist or a novel feel to it in some ways, which I think makes it particularly fascinating. But before we let you go, one last question. We talked a bit about the transition to Andy Jassy, but is there anything else as we think about Amazon's next phase and their growth and their evolution that you think we should be paying particular attention to? I know that from more pure retail perspective, we've started to talk about their plans for getting into the supermarket industry more broadly. People are talking about services and insurance and prescriptions. But from your view, what do you think is the most interesting thing that people should zoom in on?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think we should probably keep an eye on Amazon's the relationship with its workers. And Bezos said in the last shareholder letter that he kind of recognizes that there's a problem and that he wants Amazon to be the world's most or the Earth's most employee-centric company. And that's a radical change with how he's operated Amazon in the past. So the extent that they can make work in the fulfillment centers less transactional, the relationship they have with the delivery service providers who are contractors, if they can kind of keep up with their growth there, I think that's going to be more important than expansion. I mean, there will be expansion to new product categories, healthcare. We talked about satellite internet access, maybe home robots, different devices. Of all things, they've opened a hair salon in London. There will always continue to be the shiny new objects, the bizarre things that they're doing, new grocery stores. Those are coming. But fundamental to Amazon is, can they take an order and give you a promised delivery time and then meet that promise? And that is the purview of the million plus workers in the fulfillment centers. And they're entering a time of greater scrutiny over those relationships and how they conduct business. And so I think that's important. It'll be important to watch.
I mean, to me, that last part is really interesting because there's so much imagination and creativity goes into their business models that I think can be the solution if they set their mind to it, to solving problems like, as prosaic as where you urinate when you're a driver, and that's not their problem alone, but it's a lot of problem. It's a big problem. When you look at the pandemic, you see employees very safe at the facilities, but getting to and from the facilities seems to be a problem that could be solved by an organization like Amazon. So anyway, I just wanted to add that as a point of intrigue, and I think optimism to an organization that can change many things and has power to do that for good or for itself.
Yep, I agree with that.
All right, well, thanks so much. The man is Brad Stone. The book is Amazon Unbound: Jeff Bezos and the Invention of a Global Empire. It's a fantastic book. So many things we weren't even able to touch on here that you can learn a lot more about. But thanks so much, Brad, for joining us, and best luck. I don't know that you need much luck on this book. It's getting great reviews and selling very, very well. But check out Brad's work as well on the broader global technology front as part of Bloomberg.
Thank you, guys.
All right, that's a wrap on this episode, Steve. Season 3, Episode 1 in the can, ready to go. And if you liked what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, anywhere where you love your podcasts. Catch up with the great interviews. Subscribe so they will automatically show up in your podcast platform. Please take a minute and drop us a review. That's so helpful in building up our more listeners. The more reviews we got, the more listeners we get, the more we can spread the great word of retail and the hybridization of retail.
Well, and I'm Steve Dennis. You can find me on social media at Stephen P. Dennis or on my website, stephenpdennis.com. And I hope you'll check out my book. The second edition of Remarkable Retail: How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption is available just about everywhere books are sold.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, host of the Voice of Retail podcast, a bunch of other stuff. And you can find me on meleblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. Steve, have a great couple of weeks. We'll be back on the mic soon. And be safe, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of The Voice of Retail. Be sure and follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy podcasts, so you don't miss out on the latest episodes, industry news, and insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating review, as it really helps us grow so that we continue to get amazing guests onto the show. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of Emmy LeBlanc Company, Inc., and if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Until next time, stay safe, have a great week.